The truth about Satanic Baptisms. Also, how was your Halloween? I'll share some reflections about how my Halloween went, all in this episode of Satansplain.
Well, it's not Satan worship, it's Satanism. It's embracing the life-enriching things which have traditionally been given the devil's name. Pride, lust, earthly success, rational self-interest, atheism, humor, nonconformity, science, a passion for living, being selective about whom we love. We don't see these as shameful sins, but empowering ideals. And we also recognize the psychological power and fun of symbolism and aesthetics, so we utilize Satan as mythology's most fitting mascot for what we're about.
Satansplain, Satanic Talk with Church of Satan Magister Bill M.
Magister Bill M here with Satansplain. Halloween is over, but I don't know about you, I don't really want it to end. I begrudgingly took down the decorations from my yard. I know for some Satanists, Halloween is like a 24/7 thing. Not quite the case for me, at least comparatively. Anyway, I'm going to talk about Satanic Baptism later in the show, but since I brought up Halloween, I might as well continue with that, sharing some thoughts about my Halloween. I had a really great Halloween. I hope the rest of you did, too. I did my ritual late on Halloween night, but earlier in the evening, I was at home and handing out candy to the trick-or-treaters. In fact, I guess if I'm going to give an anecdote that's satanic, I might as well make it a Satanacdote, which means it's time for a Satanacdote, and that means cue the Satanacdote theme song.
Satanic anecdotes. Satanacdotes.
Wow, I think this is the earliest in an episode of Satansplain that I've ever gotten to the Satanacdote segment. Well, anyway, let's get to it. So there I was sitting on my porch on Halloween night. The weather was wonderful. My house, of course, completely decked out, completely decorated for Halloween. And I was just listening to Screamin' Jay Hawkins, sitting on my porch waiting for trick-or-treaters. I had already listened to the Halloween specials over at Radio Free Satan. I had already listened to the Metal Grotto on Radio Free Satan and the Halloween special on Radio Free Satan that was put together by Jimmy Psycho. That was great. And of course, it was my show, my other show, The Devil's Mischief on Radio Free Satan. I had a Halloween special, for The Devil's Mischief as well. And for myself, I just kept the Halloween costume simple this year. I threw on my pair of electric light-up red horns. Yeah, I know, a Satanist in devil horns, go figure. I would have liked to dress up in my full clown gear, but I just took the lazy way this time. I did buy a nice clown mug this year, though, at the Halloween store, the Spirit store. They had a ton of merchandise for the movie Killer Clowns from Outer Space. I don't know why, but I do know that I love clowns, and I wanted to buy it all, so I just settled for the mug. So, back to Halloween night. Trick-or-treaters come by, and my Satanacdote here is to talk about just a few of the trick-or-treaters that really stuck out in my mind. So one girl in a group of the trick-or-treaters said, "Ooh, nice horns." And I said, "Thank you. I got them at an AC/DC concert," which was true. And I remember that concert. It was great seeing thousands of people wearing these red devil horns in a huge arena singing along to Highway to Hell. But anyway, back to Halloween. I got trapped in an anecdote within an anecdote. So there was a teenage boy who came to the porch and asked me, "Are you the real devil?" I laughed and I said, "Well, I guess I must be." And then he went on to tell me, "So one time at this house, I got a whole bowl." I said, "Well, I don't have enough candy to give you a whole bowl." And then he says, "Yeah, I was at this house and their sign said to take one, so I took the whole bowl." Okay. I brought the bowl back the next day. I said, "Oh, okay, well, that was good." The whole thing about giving out candy for Halloween is that I see it as insurance of sorts. It's like you have to pay money for the candy, but it's cheaper than telling kids you have no candy and then having to deal with shaving cream, taking off your car paint, or, eggs on your house, or stolen lawn ornaments and that kind of stuff. And I would not blame a kid for doing that to me if they came to my house on Halloween and I had no candy, because that would be my fault. You should have candy for trick-or-treaters on Halloween if you're going to be inside on Halloween. That's what I say. So let's see, who else did I get for trick-or-treaters? There was this one boy who came up and said, "Wow, mister, you have the coolest looking house on the whole street." And I said, "Thank you very much. You get 3 candies." I saw another boy dressed as a ninja. Then maybe an hour later, I saw another boy dressed as a ninja. And I told him, "Cool, you're the second ninja who's come to the house tonight." Then again, ninjas are pretty stealthy and invisible, so there's a chance that many ninjas came here tonight and I just didn't see them. I don't know if he really appreciated the joke as much as I did. Anyway, finally, I want to talk about one more trick-or-treater I saw. I think it was one of the very last ones of the night. So as I said, I'm listening to some music as I sit there on my porch. I'm listening to some Halloween stuff. And I'm thinking, this is so beautiful out here. It just feels so nostalgic. Here with the Halloween decorations and listening to Halloween music on Halloween night. Let me dig up that Halloween special I did last year on the Devil's Mischief. I want to listen to that right now. It was a 1940s Halloween special. So I had put together a Halloween-themed comedy and novelty from the 1940s. I had a whole episode of the Jack Benny Show from 1940 where he was dressing up to go out to a Halloween party. I played in that episode the Abbott and Costello episode where they did a radio show guest starring Peter Lorre. Yes. Okay, maybe not the best Peter Lorre impersonation, but, Peter Lorre, Bing Crosby, stuff like that. So anyway, I'm listening to this 1940s episode. The opening song begins, which is Swingin' at the Seance, a nice 1940s Halloween song. And just then, this trick-or-treater comes up. He's a boy dressed in a full suit, knotted tie, old 1940s style fedora hat, and a tan trench coat. So it was like he was right out of the 1940s, and it was just so surreal, the timing of it all. I gave him his candy, said Happy Halloween, and he left. See, it's those little synchronicities in life that make the night magical. Those poetic coincidences. Not supernatural, but that kind of stuff. Anyway, that's the end of my Satanacdote. But I guess it's kind of fitting talking about how to have magic without the supernatural, because later on I am going to talk about Satanic Ritual. Magic is a metaphor, people, just like Satan. Okay, you should know that already, but I had to mention that again. Anyway, before I do any of that, let me rattle off the usual information about Satansplain. You are listening to Satansplain. Visit the official website for the show, Satansplain.com. You can listen to the episodes of Satansplain right on the website. You can also find Satansplain on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher. I was having some problems with Stitcher, but I think it finally updated with the shows it was missing. Or a couple of episodes, it was slow to update. Maybe they're just slow in general. I don't know. But in any case, many ways to listen to Satansplain. You can also follow Satansplain on Twitter or Facebook. Subscribe on YouTube. And for questions, comments, complaints, Satanacdotes, whatever, send me an email. bill@satansplain.com. That is the email address. Speaking of email, let me read some listener mail. John writes, and he says, recently joining Twitter, I've seen a lot of people confuse and make falsehoods about the Church of Satan. Whether that be fake Anton quotes or conflating the Satanic Temple with us, I was wondering, do you not think it would be beneficial for the Church of Satan to have a spokesperson? We had a few back in the 80s and 90s, Cena and Nicholas Schreck, and even Anton himself. They would go on interviews and explain Satanism more, the first family of Satanism. I realize it's not a religion for the masses, but it's sad to see that the only info found online about Satanism would be the Satanic Temple. It took me a while to find Church of Satan, so maybe it's not too bad to have a spokesperson/people to rival this situation. So I wrote back to John and I said, the Church of Satan already has plenty of spokespeople. We've never stopped having spokespeople. I am a spokesperson. I am a representative for the Church of Satan. You're listening to me now. All priesthood members of the Church of Satan can be media representatives. And even during the 80s and 90s, it wasn't like those three people you mentioned were the only spokespeople for the Church of Satan, because we had dozens of other representatives doing media appearances. You can find interviews online from that time period, those 2 decades, before and after for that matter, with plenty of Church of Satan members. Michael Rose, Reverend Andre Schlesinger, Blanche Barton, who wrote 2 books during this period. 2, let's not forget that. Peter H. Gilmore, of course, Matt Paradise, Kevin Slaughter, and dozens more. But again, getting back to recent examples, like I said, I myself am a Church of Satan representative. In fact, as I said in the previous episode, I was recently a guest on the nationally syndicated radio show Coast to Coast AM. Some of you are probably sick of me mentioning that by now, but kind of relevant to bring it up here. And also in the past year, I've been a guest on at least 2 other podcasts and also had an interview with a European magazine, and that's just me. Reverend Raoul Anthony was interviewed recently in Newsweek. They contacted us, the Church of Satan, so we gave them our statement on a thing they asked us about. J.D. Sword has been publishing stuff and interviewing for the skeptic circles. Reverend David Ingram has been in the news about his music and talking about Satanism too. Reverends Storm and Renee Anderson were just in the press for their annual Halloween stuff in Poughkeepsie. Reverend Andy Howell had some event that made the press back in August. Magus Gilmore has, of course, been in the media now and then this past year. And these are just examples, just recent things off the top of my head. So, honestly, if you don't think the Church of Satan has any spokespeople, then I don't know what to say. I can only conclude you haven't really been looking too hard. I have to wonder what sort of search criteria you're using on the internet and what search engine. I mean, did you just go to Google and only google.com? Not my first choice of search engine, personally. And just type the word Satanism? I don't know. Even then, you get some stuff. You have to wade through Christian propaganda as well, as I'm sure in the search results. Now, John additionally asks a more straightforward question, but he says he's looking into applying for registered or active membership, but he says he lives in the UK and asks if he would still go about it the same way, and the answer is yes. The Church of Satan may be headquartered in the United States, but it's a worldwide organization. Our members in the UK, as well as members in other countries, have had to go through the same process. You can find all of that information on churchofsatan.com. Look for the link in the main menu that says affiliation. So that was a sample email. How are things on Twitter, I wonder? Well, the Church of Satan posted a link to the previous Satansplain episode, and somebody replied. Let's see what people on Twitter are saying. Robust Robots replies to say, hello. And that's it. Okay. Hi, Robust Robots. Did you listen to the episode? Maybe you can elaborate? Well, anyway, let's just read another reply. So this person is replying to the tweet about Satansplain episode number 23, and he says, I just watched a video about a pastor couple who cut the silver cord on Anton LaVey after he tried to enter into the body of one of his daughters that they had led to Christ, and that's how he died. Just bought book The Serpent and the Savior, where apparently it's all detailed. Gee, thank you for sharing that. Well, at least you people right now are actually listening to Satansplain before your comment. I think that's enough Twitter insanity for me right now, so let's take a break. When we continue the truth about satanic baptisms, you are listening to Satansplain.
You are listening to Satansplain, real satanic talk with Church of Satan Magister Bill M. For questions, comments, and correspondence, send an email to bill@satansplain.com.
Christianity is the weird one, though. Christianity is such an odd religion. I was raised that way, and you can just suffer for it. You know, the whole image is that eternal suffering awaits anyone who questions God's infinite love. That's the message, isn't it, that we're brought with? Believe or die. Thank you for giving, Lord, for all those options.
If you like religion-bashing laughter and other comedy that's not made for the masses, then check out The Devil's Mischief. Visit devilsmischief.com for more details. The Devil's Mischief, carnal comedy clips and Netherworld novelty numbers available on Radio Free Satan.
Magister Bill M. here with Satansplain. It seems that recently on the internet, Satanic Unbaptisms, or something like that, was trending. Because, of course, Cevin Soling's political stunt group was offering unbaptisms to anybody and everybody at some public event at $10 a pop. Or I guess that was the suggested donation amount. And of course the media, unable to resist the clickbait, jumped at this. Even Christian podcaster Elijah Schaefer, who was fired from The Blaze earlier this year, bought into the whole thing, hook, line, and sinker. I know in the past few years the Church of Satan would respond to some of Elijah's stupid stuff on Twitter and embarrass him with facts. So he begged us to come onto his show for an interview. And our attitude was, go away, you're a dick, and we're not going to indulge you. Now, some news sources asked what we, the Church of Satan, thought of all this unbaptism business, and we pointed out that this unbaptism business is not really Satanism, it's a stunt from a political group, and that is true. But I do love the irony here, the irony of this whole thing. A bunch of people who see this booth with pentagrams and get excited and stand in line, these people standing around who probably not Satanists, and I mean people who probably don't even identify as Satanists, you know, standing in line at this event. They're not Satanists, they don't know anything about Satanism, but they do hate religion, they know that, they know they hate Christianity, they hate organized religion in general, which is all perfectly understandable. But then they see this booth with the pentagram flags, they act on impulse, they've decided they're going to express that hatred for organized religion and or renounce their Christian baptism they may have gotten as a child, you know, without any choice. And how are they going to express this hatred for organized religion? By standing in line, huddled with the other masses, and giving their money to a tax-exempt organization so they can get a service in the name of a deity. Let me repeat that. Standing in line with a bunch of other sheep, giving their money to a tax-exempt organization for a religious service they don't really believe in, and doing all of this as a statement to say, I hate organized religion. Gee, nothing hypocritical about that. At all. No siree. In fact, I found an article from Newsweek from earlier this year saying that these same people, Cevin Soling's political stunt group, were booked to do the same stunt at a Pride event back in June during Pride Month, but dropped out. And I have to wonder this. Did somebody at the Satanic Temple look at this whole thing and say, hey, guys, I was thinking I want to do this Pride event because, you know, I'm a strong believer in LGBT rights and, you know, I'm an ally, but the biggest opposers of gay rights are fundamentalist Christians who think being gay or bi or trans is a sin, you know. So maybe showing up in black robes and inverted crosses to do satanic rituals wouldn't really help the cause. Like, if anything, it would directly play into what Christians are saying. So, hey, how about we just, like tuck in the pentagram necklaces and just show up in numbers as individuals who are just there for pride. Now, this is pure speculation on my part. I realize that. I do, however, remember seeing a Facebook post several years back from the Satanic Temple back in like 2020, where somebody here in Boston was saying, you know, hey guys, let's not actually carry the Satan signs and wear the black cloaks and stuff to this Black Lives Matter event because, you know, blacks have enough difficulties to go through, and this will just make things more difficult. To which I thought, great, now why don't you expand on that logic, and you'll realize that there's really no point to the rest of your protests. You're not helping the world. You're getting a directionless reactionary thrill to being blasphemous, and that's about it. Anyway, enough about them. Let's talk about actual Satanism, namely Satanic Baptisms. Not Unbaptisms, but Satanic Baptisms. Is there really such a thing? Why, yes, there is. You can find 2 baptism ceremonies in The Satanic Rituals by Anton Szandor LaVey. I ranted about ritual in general a couple of episodes back. It seems to be that out of the 5 books that Anton LaVey wrote, I would say the one that I suspect seems to be the least read, at least these days, is The Satanic Rituals. And the reason for that is that the book is essentially made up of various group rituals that Satanists can do, and unfortunately so few Satanists make the effort to hook up with other Satanists for group rituals these days. And it's not just because of the COVID lockdowns or things like that. Now, you could certainly make the argument that Satanists are a minority in the first place, and that even if you do find a Satanist in your area, he or she is not necessarily going to come right out of the closet as a Satanist and hook up with a complete stranger. You could argue that Satanists are often, reclusive and introverted and misanthropic. Certainly not all Satanists, but perhaps more percentage-wise than you see in most other demographics. You could argue that in this day and age of the internet, that when Satanists want to talk to other Satanists, we can just go to the internet. We don't have to meet up in person. You could say, well, Satanists don't need to congregate with other Satanists. That's not a requirement. And, group rituals, that's not a requirement either. Yeah. That's all true. But satanic group rituals do still exist. They're still part of Satanism. Some of us Satanists do get together in person, and sometimes even do rituals together too. Even though I suspect there are still many Satanists out there who have never participated in a group ritual ever. Regardless, I strongly believe that it is something every Satanist should try at least once in their lives. In fact, the Satanic Bible makes it really clear that ritual can be solitary or a group ritual with, that's 2 or more people, but it points out that there are advantages and disadvantages to each one. To quote the Satanic Bible, a group ritual is certainly much more of a reinforcement of faith and an installation of power than is a private ceremony. The massing together of persons who are dedicated to a common philosophy is bound to ensure renewal of confidence in the power of magic. The pageantry of religion is what has sustained it. When religion consistently becomes a solitary situation, it reaches into that realm of self-denial, which runs concurrent with antisocial behavior. It is for this reason that the Satanist should attempt to seek out others with whom to engage in these ceremonies. Now, as mentioned earlier in the Satanic Bible, and I'm sure I've also mentioned here on Satansplain before, spiritual religions have used ritual as a reinforcement of their faith, their lies, their dogma. In fact, humans use rituals in other ways to sustain loyalty or belief or enthusiasm in something. Sports teams have their logos and their cheers. Schools have their pep rallies. Political activists have rallies with the same sorts of things. Companies in the corporate world will have their little social events and seminars to keep up morale and identify as an employee. So in Satanism, we say you can use symbolism and ceremony to sustain belief in the truth that's in the philosophical part of Satanism. Granted, you have to intellectually understand it, but it goes hand in hand with that emotional component, the theatrics, the ritual. It makes it all emotionally sustaining, not to mention really fun. So when it comes to solitary versus group ritual, yeah, we know how powerful it can be to be alone in the ritual chamber and channel your own thoughts, be in complete control of the entire situation, your own environment, your own way. But a group ritual can be just as fulfilling too, in a slightly different way. To have to live throughout the day as somebody in this minority religion, to live as a Satanist among the masses, only to then finally meet fellow Satanists in person, to get into the ritual chamber together, to hear fellow Satanists in the room, singular in focus in that controlled environment, hearing them shout, "Hail Satan," with you at the same time. Those of you who've done this know just how empowering, invigorating, and memorable that can be. Thus, the Satanic Bible spends over half of its pages on the topic of ritual, and in addition to that, we have this entire book, you see, called, appropriately enough, the Satanic Rituals. Now, these are not required rituals. This isn't an initiatory religion where you have to take sacraments in a specific order like the Catholics do or something like that. But these rituals are a good collection. They're a good collection of group rituals based on mythologies taken from different parts of the world. You can certainly adopt some of them into solitary rituals if you're creative enough. I've done that myself before with some of them. At the very, very least, if you get nothing else out of this episode of Satansplain, I will tell you this. If you have the Satanic Rituals, you have that book, and maybe have not read it in a while, or maybe even haven't opened it, read the introductory chapter of the book titled Concerning the Rituals, because it's a great expansion of the topics of ritual and greater magic as presented in the Satanic Bible. So when you're done listening to this episode, try to set aside some time to dig up your paperback copy of the Satanic Rituals and at least read that chapter. Back to the topic of ritual itself, another thing I did back in 1998 was the Satanic Baptism. There were 8 or 9 of us in the room, Satanists. My friend Phil, a Church of Satan member, was conducting the ritual in the role of priest. We had another guy who was going to drive in from New York who was bringing in some of the ritual tools, and his car broke down, or at least that's what he told us, so he couldn't arrive. Fortunately, we had enough of the other altar tools so that we could cut some corners and make it all work. So Phil conducted the ritual and baptized 3 of us that night, including me. It was a lot of fun, and one of those events I'll just always remember. So what is a satanic baptism really all about? How did it come about? What is the significance of it? Why might a Satanist be interested in having one performed on himself or herself? I mean, what would be the point, some may argue, if we say that Satanists are born, not made? And if a Christian baptism is to wash away original sin, then what would that mean for a Satanist? For that matter, how would infant baptisms make any sense in Satanism if Satanism doesn't believe in childhood indoctrination? All questions which I will answer. Back in 1967, Anton LaVey performed a satanic baptism for his daughter Zena, and it was covered in a lot of the press. It was, I think, one of the first public satanic rituals ever. And after that, some Church of Satan members expressed interest in wanting baptism for themselves. Some of these members were ex-members of Christian churches and other religions who had some sort of conventional baptism, and they wanted the same thing for Satanism. They were proud of being Satanists, and they said, hey, I would like to have a ritual to commemorate this, make this decision to be a Satanist, this newfound commitment to Satanism, feel official. So LaVey then reworked the ritual he had done, that baptism he used for his daughter, into 2 different rituals. I am now going to read to you, straight from the book, The Satanic Rituals, what Anton LaVey had to say. The Satanic Baptisms. Since the formation of the Church of Satan, many persons wishing to solemnize their newly acknowledged dedication to satanic principles have requested a quote-unquote baptismal rite, whereby they might utilize an established form of religious observance for more compatible beliefs. As a result, 2 distinct ceremonies have been created, one for infants and the other for adults who have reached the legal age of consent. Of course, any ceremony performed for an infant is not really performed for the child, but for the parents. With this thought in mind, a baptism in the traditional sense could serve no productive purpose by satanic standards. A child's quote-unquote baptism according to Satanic tenets, must therefore be in the nature of a celebration rather than a purification. In this sense, a Satanic baptism for children becomes a Christian baptism in reverse. Instead of cleansing the infant of original sin and preparing him for a life of blind devotion to an existing faith, the Satanic baptism pays homage to the miracle of the child's creation, his capacity for unbefouled development, and his freedom from hypocrisy. The children's ceremony included here is intended for children under the age of 4. Beyond that age, ideas alien to Satanic development have been absorbed into the child's mind via the formal teachings of older and often unwiser humans. Once that process has begun, only the individual can thereafter rightfully choose a credo for himself and formalize it, hence the need for a Satanic baptismal rite for adults. Legal age of consent is essential to the adult's ceremony because of the double-edged sword that term provides. Environmental legislation contends, rightly or otherwise, that when a person reaches a certain chronological age, he is capable of managing his own affairs and making his own decisions. It is assumed that any such decisions are a byproduct of his mental and emotional development, the result of both heredity and environment. This behavioral composite is also influenced by what is referred to as, quote, proper guidance or, quote, improper guidance, depending on whom is speaking. Attainment of legal age enables one to, quote unquote, misguide himself as he sees fit and to assume the blame or take the credit for his own actions. And on a side note, yes, you will hear me say quote unquote often to reflect the scare quotes which are used in the book. And I'm doing that because I want to relay this information as clearly as I can. And I don't need idiots taking this thing out of context and taking everything too literally. So, continuing. Inasmuch as all Satanists would be considered, quote-unquote, misguided by the pious, we have no wish to offend further sensibilities of the self-righteous by luring apple-cheeked boys and girls into, quote-unquote, unholy rites and unspeakable orgies. Virtually every unsuccessful, usually deservedly so, contemporary sect or cult which has deviated from the established Christian dogma has fallen because the pious majority has been outraged by said cult's traffic with underage persons. Admittedly, many of these cults have been little more than confidence games or sexual outlets cloaked in white light spirituality. While we concur that age is no proof of sound judgment, we recognize the importance of working within the legal framework of society. And another side note here, this is a good example of Satanists having to be practical. You can read more on the Church of Satan website as to why we don't allow people under the age of 18 to join the Church of Satan. And yes, I have met teenagers who were under 18 but totally understood Satanism, and I've met people much older than me who, thought they were Satanists but turned out to be clueless. Unfortunately, the world considers you your parents' property until you turn 18, and given all the other past accusations of Satanists sacrificing children or indoctrinating children or doing nefarious things with children, we don't need the hassle. So that's why you got to be 18 to join. You don't have to be 18 necessarily to be a Satanist, but you got to be 18 to join the Church of Satan. Hopefully you understand why. Now, continuing with the article. There is nothing inherently wrong with morality. In fact, it is necessary for the great enjoyment which comes with controlled, rational, and harmless immorality. What is objectionable, though, is a morality based on obsolete and exhausted principles. The children's quote-unquote baptism set forth here rejoices in the infant's intrinsic freedom from such expendable principles. The adult's baptism celebrates the individual's rejection of those precepts and his subsequent adherence to satanic ethic. What, it will be asked, will young readers whose ages fall between the two baptisms do to commit themselves to Satanism? The answer is that whether you are right or wrong, your beliefs will not be held valid by those outside unless money can be made on them. If enough of you believe in the principles of Satanism, they will find ways of making money on your faith. Then, without realizing it, they will have contributed to Lucifer's rise by making popular what once was shunned as evil. Your faith in Satanism need not be formalized by baptism in order to work its magic. Your faith need only be outspokenly stated. That is what you can do. Oh, and to anybody out there who may have heard that last part and are thinking, aha, being outspoken about Satanism is exactly what those people were doing when they signed up for that Unbaptism ceremony at the festival. No. No, they're not. The question was, what can you do to commit yourself to Satanism? That's not what was being done. LaVey also just said in the part I read, quote, if enough of you believe in the principles of Satanism, and the people standing in line for that, again, don't. For more information, I recommend reading Anton LaVey's essay titled Get a Life. It is in his book, Satan Speaks, and the essay is also available for free reading on churchofsatan.com. Anyway, so that concludes the introduction to the baptisms in the Satanic Rituals. To reiterate, we have two types of baptisms in Satanism, one for children, one for adults. They are not required, they are optional. The child baptism is not really for the child, it is for the parents. A baby, let alone a child, does not comprehend religion. There are, however, parents who are Satanists who may want a ceremony to celebrate being parents, to celebrate bringing a life into the world, not from God, not from miracles, but from biology, which is how babies are actually made. They made the life, the parents. And they might want a ceremony to celebrate this child being in its most primal state, uncorrupted by the lies of spiritual religions. They may want a ceremonial reminder for confidence going forward in their duty as parents. So that's what the first of the two types of satanic baptisms is about. The second type of satanic baptism, like I said, the one that I went through myself, is the adult baptism. Now, in terms of the props and the words and the going through the motions, the two different baptisms are pretty similar. And again, you'll see different wording tailored to fit the situation. The infant baptism, for example, tones down the Old English style of talking. It doesn't use the these and the thys. It also skips the incense because you don't want to be blowing smoke at a baby. It's also shorter, too, because babies, may not stay quiet for too long. Speaking of incense, you may see references in the adult version of this ritual to use a brazier, brazier. That's a brazier. And that is not the same thing as a brazier. I know it phonetically looks the same, but brazier is spelled brassiere. And yeah, I mentioned this because I have heard one person, at least one, mispronounce it. Anyway, so yeah, brassiere, that is a woman's undergarment. That is a bra. Not to be confused with a brazier, which is a plate or a little bowl you put hot coals on so that you can burn powdered incense. I mean, I suppose you could burn incense in a brazier, but bras are not really suited for that. The coals would probably burn through the cloth. Unless maybe you have one of those metal bras like Madonna wore in 1990. Otherwise, stick with a plate, a brazier, or use one of those incense sticks, or otherwise, the other Satanists in the room will stare at you in disbelief at what you're doing and point to the brazier and say, "Brah." All right, that was a bad pun, but I had to get it out. So, anyway, let's get back to the topic. So it's possible to do the adult baptism with as few as two people. You can do it with two people, one person acting as the priest or priestess in the ceremony, and the other being the recipient. I've talked before about the ritualistic significance of the four elements, fire, air, earth, water. Yeah, I know science has revealed that the four elements are not really elements, and we have the periodic table and all that. Yeah, I know. But you see, there are still some very deep Jungian archetypes, I would say, when it comes to the four elements. It was back in the episode I did on Luciferianism, episode number 13 of Satansplain, I believe, where I talked about the satanic symbolic take of the 4 elements and how they relate to the 4 points of the ritual chamber, and it's part of the pentagram, too. Again, this is not supernatural talk. This is ancient symbolism, which Satanism has taken up and adopted and customed to fit in with the philosophical part of Satanism. And it's during the baptisms in particular where, and you can read for this yourself in the book, where it incorporates some actual water and incense to represent the air, and a little bit of dirt, for the element of earth, and a lit candle for fire. Those are all incorporated in the baptism ritual for adults. And as I said earlier, the rituals we have in Satanism are not these super strict things you have to follow word for word. Though, as I mentioned a couple of episodes ago, even if you were to follow them word for word, they still leave a lot of room for, customization and improvisation. And when I was reading through the Satanic Baptism for myself, back before we did it, I noticed that the climax of the ritual is near the end, where the initiate, for lack of a better word, we'll say the initiate, stands up, raises his or her hand in the sign of the horns, and is read an oath by the priest. Now, the initiate in the original ritual doesn't talk at all. So, I saw this part of the ritual, and I said to the other guys that night, hey, this is great, but I think it would be even more powerful, more moving, if the priest just read the oath line by line to the first person, and then we, the guys getting baptized, repeated each line back. Because then, it feels more like an actual oath we're taking. And they agreed. And for any Satanists listening who are planning on performing the baptism, I highly recommend you do the same. So with that, I would now like to read you that very oath from the adult baptismal rite in the Satanic Rituals, but read it to you reworded in the first person. I, who hath forsworn the divine mindlessness, do proclaim the majesty of mine own being amongst the marvels of the universe. I rejecteth oblivion of self, and accepteth the pleasure and pain of unique existence. I am returned from death to life, and declareth my friendship with Lucifer, Lord of Light, who is exalted as Satan. I receiveth the sigil of Baphomet, and embraceth the black flame of cherished enlightenment. I hath assumed this infernal commitment of mine own volition, without let nor hindrance, this act being done without coercion, and of mine own desire, and according to my will. Hail Satan. And with that, let us end this episode of Satansplain. Thank you for listening. You have been listening to Satansplain. If you have enjoyed this episode, please give it a like and subscribe where available. For more information on the show, visit Satansplain.com. And to learn more about Satanism itself, visit churchofsatan.com. This episode, copyright 2022, Magister Bill M.